Chapter 11, Part 2, which begins on the top of page 135. Sometimes I got behind the wheel of my Ford, rolled down the windows, and drove for hours from the East Bay to the South Bay, up the peninsula and back. I drove through the grids of cottonwood-lined streets in our Fremont neighborhood, where people who'd never shaken hands with kings lived in shabby, flat, one-story houses with barred windows, where old cars like mine dripped oil on black driveways. Pencil gray chain-link fences closed off the backyards in our neighborhood. Toys, bald tires, and beer bottles with peeling labels littered unkempt front lawns. I drove past tree-shaded parks that smelled like bark, past strip malls big enough to hold 5 simultaneous bushkashi tournaments. I drove the Torino up the hills of Los Altos, idling past estates with picture windows and silver lions guarding the wrought iron gates, homes with cherub fountains lining the manicured walkways, and no Ford Torinos in the driveway. Homes that made Baba's house in Wazir Akbar Khan look like a servant's hut. I'd get up early some Saturday mornings and drive south on Highway 17, push the Ford up the winding road through the mountains to Santa Cruz. I would park by the old lighthouse and wait for sunrise, sit in my car and watch the fog rolling in from the sea. In Afghanistan, I had only seen the ocean at the cinema. Sitting in the dark next to Hassan, I had always wondered if it was true what I'd read, that sea air smelled like salt. I used to tell Hassan that someday we'd walk on a strip of seaweed-strewn beach, sink our feet in the sand, and watch the water recede from our toes. The first time I saw the Pacific, I almost cried. It was as vast and blue as the oceans on the movie screens of my childhood. Sometimes in the early evening, I parked the car and walked up a freeway overpass. My face pressed against the fence, I'd try to count the blinking red taillights inching along, stretching as far as my eyes could see. BMWs, Saabs, Porsches. Cars I'd never seen in Kabul, where most people drove Russian Volgas, old Opels, or Iranian Pikans. Almost 2 years had passed since we had arrived in the U.S., and I was still marveling at the size of this country, its vastness. Beyond every freeway lay another freeway. Beyond every city, another city. Hills beyond mountains, and mountains beyond hills, and, beyond those, more cities and more people. Long before the Rusi army marched into Afghanistan, long before villages were burned and schools destroyed, long before mines were planted like seeds of death and children buried in rock-piled graves, Kabul had become a city of ghosts for me, a city of hair-lipped ghosts. America was different. America was a river roaring alone, unmindful of the past. I could wade into this river, let my sins drown to the bottom, let the waters carry me someplace far, someplace with no ghosts, no memories, and no sins. If for nothing else, for that, I embraced America. So there's an interesting metaphor, the metaphor of America being a river. So as we talked about in the in the PowerPoint, it's interesting to think about the qualities of this river that he's talking about and to compare those with the America that he's talking about. Okay, the following summer, the summer of 1984, the summer I turned 21, Baba sold his Buick and bought a dilapidated 71 Volkswagen bus for $550 from an old Afghan acquaintance who'd been a high school science teacher in Kabul. The neighbors' heads turned the afternoon the bus sputtered up the street and farted its way across our lot. Baba killed the engine and let the bus roll silently into our designated spot. We sank in our seats, laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks, and, more important, until we were sure the neighbors weren't watching anymore. The bus was a sad carcass of rusted metal, shattered windows replaced with black garbage bags, balding tires, and upholstery shredded down to the springs. But the old teacher had reassured Baba that the engine and transmission were sound, and on that account the man hadn't lied. On Saturdays, Baba woke me up at dawn. As he dressed, I scanned the classifieds in the local papers and circled the garage sale ads. We mapped our route: Fremont, Union City, Newark, and Hayward first, then San Jose, Milpitas, Sunnyvale, and Campbell if time permitted. Baba drove the bus, sipping hot tea from the thermos, and I navigated. We stopped at garage sales and bought knickknacks that people no longer wanted. We haggled over old sewing machines, one-eyed Barbie dolls, wooden tennis rackets, guitars with missing strings, and old Electrolux vacuum cleaners. By mid-afternoon, we'd filled the back of the VW bus with used goods. Then, early Sunday mornings, we drove to the San Jose flea market off Berryessa, rented a spot, and sold the junk for a small profit. A Chicago record that we'd bought for a quarter the day before might go for $1, or $4 for a set of 5. A ramshackle Singer sewing machine purchased for $10 might, after some bargaining, bring in $25. By that summer, Afghan families were working an entire section of the San Jose flea market. Afghan music played in the aisles of the used goods section. There was an unspoken code of behavior among Afghans at the flea market. You greeted the guy across the aisle. You invited him for a bite of potato bologna or a little kabali, and you chatted. You offered tasalli, condolences for the death of a parent, congratulated the birth of children, and shook your head mournfully when the conversation turned to Afghanistan and the Russis, which is the Russians, just in case you hadn't figured that out, which it inevitably did. But you avoided the topic of Saturdays, because it might turn out that the fellow across the aisle was the guy you'd nearly blindsided at the freeway exit yesterday in order to beat him to a promising garage sale. The only thing that flowed more than tea in those aisles was Afghan gossip. The flea market was where you sipped green tea with almond kolkas and learned whose daughter had broken off an engagement and run off with her American boyfriend, who used to be a parchami, a communist, in Kabul, and who had bought a house with under-the-table money while still on welfare. Tea, politics, and scandal, the ingredients of an Afghan Sunday at the flea market. I ran the stand sometimes as Baba sauntered down the aisle, hands respectfully pressed to his chest, greeting people he knew from Kabul, mechanics and tailors selling hand-me-down wool coats and scraped bicycle helmets, alongside former ambassadors, out-of-work surgeons, and university professors. One early Sunday morning in July 1984, while Baba sat up, I bought 2 cups of coffee from the concession stand and returned to find Baba talking to an older, distinguished-looking man. I put the cups on the rear bumper of the bus, next to the Reagan Bush for '84 sticker. "Amir," Baba said, motioning me over, "this is General Saib, Mr. Iqbal Tahiri. He was a decorated general in Kabul. He worked for the Ministry of Defense." Now, if you are someone like me who forgets names, then remember to square this name or somehow otherwise indicate it so you remember who this guy is. Tahiri. Why did that name sound familiar? The general laughed like a man used to attending formal parties where he'd laughed on cue at the minor jokes of important people. He had wispy silver-gray hair combed back from his smooth, tanned forehead and tufts of white in his bushy eyebrows. He smelled like cologne and wore an iron-gray 3-piece suit, shiny from too many pressings. The gold chain of a pocket watch dangled from his vest. "Such a lofty introduction," he said, his voice deep and cultured. "Salam, Bashem." "Hello, my child." "Salam, General Sahib," I said, shaking his hand. His thin hands belied a firm grip, as if steel hid beneath his moisturized skin. "Amir is going to be a great writer," Baba said. I did a double take at this. He has finished his first year of college and earned A's in all of his courses. Junior college, I corrected him. Mashallah, General Tahiri said. Will you be writing about our country? History, perhaps? Economics? I write fiction, I said, thinking of the dozen or so short stories I had written in the leather-bound notebook Rahim Khan had given me, wondering why I was suddenly embarrassed by them in this man's presence. Ah, a storyteller, the general said. Well, people need stories to divert them at difficult times like this. He put his hand on Baba's shoulder and turned to me. Speaking of stories, your father and I hunted pheasant together one summer day in Jalalabad, he said. It was a marvelous time. If I recall correctly, your father's eye proved as keen in the hunt as it had in business. Baba kicked a wooden tennis racket on our tarpaulin spread with the toe of his boot. Some business. General Tahiri managed a simultaneously sad and polite smile, heaved a sigh, and gently patted Baba's shoulder. Zendagi Migzara, he said. Life goes on. He turned his eyes to me. We Afghans are prone to a considerable degree of exaggeration, Bahem, and I have heard many men foolishly labeled great. But your father has the distinction of belonging to the minority who truly deserves the label. This little speech sounded to me the way his suit looked, often used and unnaturally shiny. You're flattering me, Baba said. I am not, the general said, tilting his head sideways and pressing his hand to his chest to convey humility. Boys and girls must know the legacy of their fathers. He turned to me. Do you appreciate your father, Bahem? Do you really appreciate him? Ballet, General Sahib, I do, I said, wishing he'd not called me my child. Then, congratulations, you are already halfway to being a man, he said with no trace of humor, no irony, the compliment of the casually arrogant. Padarjan, you forgot your tea. A young woman's voice. She was standing behind us, a slim-hipped beauty with velvety coal-black hair, an open thermos and styrofoam cup in her hand. I blinked, my heart quickening. She had thick black eyebrows that touched in the middle like the arched wings of a flying bird, and the gracefully hooked nose of a princess from old Persia, maybe that of Tamaneh, Rostam's wife and Sohrab's mother from the Shahnameh. Her eyes, walnut brown and shaded by fanned lashes, met mine, held for a moment, flew away. You are so kind, my dear, General Tahiri said. He took the cup from her. Before she turned to go, I saw she had a brown, sickle-shaped birthmark on the smooth skin just above her left jawline. She walked to a dull gray van 2 aisles away and put the thermos inside. Her hair spilled to one side when she kneeled amid boxes of old records and paperbacks. My daughter, Soroyajan, General Tahiri said. He took a deep breath like a man eager to change the subject and checked his gold pocket watch. Well, time to go and set up. He and Baba kissed on the cheek, and he shook my hand with both of his. Best of luck with the writing, he said, looking me in the eye. His pale blue eyes revealed nothing of the thoughts behind them. For the rest of that day, I fought the urge to look toward the gray van. Love is in the air. Okay, next space. It came to me on our way home. Tahiri. I knew I'd heard that name before. Wasn't there some story floating around about Tahiri's daughter? I said to Baba, trying to sound casual. You know me, Baba said, inching the bus along the queue exiting the flea market. Talk turns to gossip and I walk away. But there wasn't there, I said. Why do you ask? He was looking at me coyly. I shrugged and fought back a smile. Just curious, Baba. Really? Is that all? He said, his eyes playful, lingering on mine. Has she made an impression on you? I rolled my eyes. Please, Baba. He smiled and swung the bus out of the flea market. We headed for Highway 680. We drove in silence for a while. All I've heard is that there was a man once and things didn't go well, he said. He said this gravely, like he'd disclosed to me that she had breast cancer. Oh. I hear she is a decent girl, hard-working and kind, but no Kestigars, no suitors, have knocked on the General's door since. Baba sighed. It may be unfair, but what happens in a few days, sometimes even a single day, can change the course of a whole lifetime, Amir, he said. Lying awake in bed that night, I thought of Soroya Tahiri's sickle-shaped birthmark, her gently hooked nose, and the way her luminous eyes had fleetingly held mine. My heart stuttered at the thought of her. Soroya Tahiri, my swap meet princess. And I just want to mention there at the top of page 142 where he says, what happens in a few days, even a single day, can change the course of a whole lifetime. I believe that that is the essence of irony right there, and truly addresses Amir and the issues that he has faced since that day in the alley. So just something to think about there.